the galaxy's strongest armada cornered humanity. Then they discovered Earth had set the trap. 900 warships dropped out of slipspace in perfect formation, and for 3 full seconds, no one on the human flagship, Meridian's Oath, said a single word. Grand Marshal Voss Tholrak of the Korveth Dominion watched the tactical display bloom with red, hostile icons. More firepower than had ever been assembled in Dominion history. And allowed himself a small, satisfied breath. The humans were finished. Their pitiful colony fleet of 40 ships sat trapped between the Dominion Armada and the dead-end gravity well of the Kethari Reach, a region so choked with debris and radiation that no ship dared risk it. Signal the human commander, Tholrak ordered. Tell them surrender terms expire in 10 minutes. But something was wrong. The human ships weren't panicking. They weren't scattering, weren't broadcasting desperate pleas, weren't even raising shields. They were waiting, but none of this had begun that way. 6 weeks earlier, the human colony world of Ashgrove Station had been a quiet backwater. 3 million souls farming ice comets and refining rare minerals at the edge of Dominion-claimed space. Governor Elena Voss had spent her career trying to keep Ashgrove off every empire's radar. She'd failed. The Korveth Dominion had been expanding for 2 centuries, a civilization of 6-limbed, warrior scholars who measured worth in conquest. They did not negotiate, they annexed. And when Dominion scouts discovered that Ashgrove sat atop the richest deposit of Hyrillium crystal in the sector, the substance that powered every Dominion warship's core, the Dominion Senate did not send diplomats. They sent Marshal Tholrak and 900 ships. Elena Voss stood in her cramped command center as the first Dominion warning beacon reached her desk. She should twice. Then she called someone she'd hoped never to need. Admiral Reyes, she said into the comm, I need the fleet. 3,000 light-years away, a man who had not slept in 2 days, finally closed his eyes, and dreamed of the war he'd spent his whole life trying to prevent. Admiral Marcus Reyes was not a hero in any story anyone had written yet. He was 58 years old, quiet, methodical, and utterly unremarkable to look at. Which was precisely why the Terran Confederation had made him the architect of Earth's deep space deterrence doctrine. While other species built armadas to conquer, humanity had spent its first century of interstellar life building something else entirely. Patience. They'll have 900 ships, his chief strategist, Commander Priya Anand, said, staring at the projections. We have 40 at Ashgrove. Even with reinforcements we can't match that. We're not going to match it, Reyes said. We're going to make them choose the battlefield we want. The council thought they understood human strategy. They understood nothing. Reyes had studied the Korveth Dominion for 11 years. Their pride, their rigid honor codes, their absolute confidence that overwhelming force always won. He knew Tholrak's reputation. Brilliant, ruthless, and utterly incapable of imagining that a smaller force might want to be cornered. So Reyes gave them exactly what they expected. A retreating human fleet, a dead-end system. An obvious trap that looked, from the outside, like desperation. It was not desperation, it was bait. The Kethari Reach had been abandoned by every spacefaring civilization for 300 years, and for good reason. Its asteroid density and ambient radiation made sensors nearly useless and shields degrade twice as fast. No sane commander would fight there, which was exactly why Reyes chose it. For 4 weeks, while Dominion scouts tracked the trapped human fleet, 600 Terran engineers worked in absolute radio silence inside the Reach's largest asteroid cluster. They weren't building weapons, they were building anchors. Magnetic resonance emitters buried deep in a dozen asteroids, silent and invisible to Dominion sensors, calibrated to a frequency the Dominion had never encountered because humanity had invented it in secret 18 months earlier. Nobody knew what the humans were hiding. Not even most of the human crews knew. Only Reyes, Anand, and a dozen engineers understood the full plan. Everyone else, including Elena Voss, watching from Ashgrove Station with her heart in her throat, believed they were about to witness humanity's last stand. Admiral, Voss said over a secure channel the night before the Dominion Armada arrived, if this doesn't work, 3 million people on my station die. I need to know we're not just buying time. Reyes was quiet for a long moment. Governor, I won't lie to you. There's a version of this where I'm wrong about everything, and we lose. But I've spent my whole career making sure that version is the least likely one on the board. That wasn't the comfort she wanted, it was the only one he could honestly give. When the Dominion Armada finally arrived, everything unfolded exactly as Tholrak expected, which was, itself, the first mistake. The human fleet held position at the mouth of the Kethari Reach, weapons cold, shields at minimum power. Tholrak's sensor officers reported the humans were broadcasting nothing but standard distress protocols. Textbook desperation, they're bluffing with nothing. Tholrak's second-in-command, Commander Izeth, said, "Should we simply advance and end this?" Everything changed in the next few seconds. Tholrak gave the order. 900 Dominion warships surged forward into formation, their overwhelming numbers meant to crush any resistance in a single devastating pass. Directly into the debris field of the Kethari Reach, exactly where Reyes needed them. The moment the lead Dominion cruisers crossed the invisible threshold Reyes's engineers had mapped weeks earlier, Anand's voice cut through the Meridian's Oath Bridge like a blade. "Admiral. They've crossed the line, activate the anchors." What happened next had no precedent in galactic warfare, because no civilization besides humanity had ever built it. The buried resonance emitters activated simultaneously, flooding the Kethari Reach's dense asteroid field with a modulated magnetic pulse that did something no Dominion engineer would have believed possible. It turned 300 cubic kilometers of ordinary rock and metal debris into a weapon. Every asteroid, every fragment, every piece of ancient debris in the Reach began moving, not randomly, but precisely drawn and redirected along magnetic channels the humans had spent a month engineering in total secrecy. Dominion shields, already weakened by the Reach's ambient radiation, buckled under an avalanche of debris their sensors hadn't tracked because it hadn't been moving until the instant it struck. The truth stunned the entire Dominion fleet. Tholrak watched in disbelief as 40 of his ships lost propulsion in the first 90 seconds, hulls scarred and drifting. This wasn't a weapon his intelligence division had ever catalogued, this wasn't even a weapon in any conventional sense. It was the battlefield itself, turned against them. "Impossible," Tholrak breathed. "Humans do not have this technology, Marshal," Izeth said, voice tight. "The human fleet is moving." The 40 human ships, which had sat motionless and unarmed for the entire engagement, finally came alive. Not to attack the crippled Dominion vanguard, but to peel away cleanly through a pre-mapped safe corridor, leaving the wounded Dominion Armada tangled in its own debris field. But that wasn't even the biggest surprise. Reyes had never intended to destroy the Dominion fleet. Destruction would only breed a war of retaliation that Earth, still young among the stars, could not sustain. He'd built something crueler and more merciful at once, a trap that crippled without killing, that humiliated without slaughtering. "Open a channel to Marshal Tholrak," Reyes said. When Tholrak's furious face appeared on screen, Reyes spoke calmly, without triumph. "Marshal, your fleet has lost maneuverability across roughly 60% of your vanguard. My ships have not fired a single shot. I'd like to discuss terms." Tholrak's 4 eyes narrowed. "You expect me to believe humans built this from nothing? Some trick of debris cannot best the Dominion Armada." "It's not a trick," Reyes said. "It's called patience, Marshal. We spent 11 years studying your doctrine, before we ever built a weapon to counter it. You've spent 2 centuries winning wars, by being the biggest fleet in the room. We spent that same time learning that the room matters more than the fleet." The Marshal had made a terrible mistake, and for the first time in his career he understood exactly how large it was. For 3 days, the crippled Dominion vanguard drifted in the Kethari Reach, while Tholrak's engineers worked to restore propulsion, and for 3 days, the human fleet made no move to finish what they'd started. Reyes could have ordered the killing blow, every officer on his bridge expected him to, he didn't. "Sir," Anand asked quietly, "why let them repair? We could end the Dominion threat to Ashgrove permanently right now." Reyes looked at the tactical display, at 900 proud warships humbled not by superior firepower, but by a battlefield humanity had learned better than its enemy. "Because winning a war, and winning a future aren't the same thing, Commander. If we slaughter them here, the Dominion sends the next fleet with blood in their eyes and no lessons learned. If we let them go home changed, we might actually end this, without another shot fired for a generation. It was the hardest decision of his career, and he made it without a moment of visible doubt. When Marshal Tholrak finally limped his battered armada back, across the Dominion border, he carried with him something more dangerous to his empire than any weapon, proof that the galaxy's assumptions about humanity were wrong. Reports of the Kethari Reach reached the Dominion Senate within the week. And for the first time in 2 centuries, the word human was spoken in Dominion war councils, not with contempt, but with something closer to caution. Elena Voss stood on Ashgrove Station's observation deck, as the last Dominion warship vanished from her sensors. 3 million lives still breathing because of a plan she'd never fully understood until it was over. She found Reyes's face on her comm and simply said, "Thank you." Reyes, exhausted, allowed himself the smallest smile he'd worn in weeks. "Don't thank me yet, Governor, this bought us time. What we do with it is what matters now." Back aboard, the Meridian's Oath, Commander Anand found Reyes alone in the observation bay, watching the last of the debris field settle back into silence. She'd served under him for 6 years and had never once seen him look this tired. "The engineers want to know if we're decommissioning the anchors," she said, "or leaving them active, in case the Dominion comes back." "Leave them buried," Reyes said. "But power them down. If we ever need them again, that means we've already failed at something more important. Diplomacy." "Everything," he said. "The anchors were never the plan, Priya. They were the last resort we built so we'd never have to use them twice." She understood. Then, something she'd suspected but never fully grasped, the entire Kethari operation hadn't been designed to win a battle. It had been designed to end a war before it truly began. 3 weeks later, a Dominion diplomatic shuttle, unarmed, painted in the pale ceremonial colors the Dominion reserved for surrender or truce, request passage into Terran space. Reyes met the envoy personally, a scarred old Korveth statesman named Orcs, who had lost 2 sons in wars of conquest and had grown, in his final years, deeply weary of them. "The Senate does not send me to apologize," Orcs said through the translator, his 6 limbs folded in the rigid posture of formal address. "The Dominion does not apologize. But the Senate has voted to recognize Terran sovereignty over the Ashgrove system, and to open formal trade channels." "That's more than I expected," Reyes admitted. "Marshal Tholrak argued against it for 3 days," Orcs said. "He called it weakness, but the Senate has learned what he refuses to accept, that a species patient enough to wait 11 years for one battle is not a species we can afford to underestimate twice." The Council had been wrong about humanity from the very beginning, and for the first time in 2 centuries they were willing to say so. Reyes didn't celebrate. He simply nodded, shook the envoy's clawed hand in the human custom the translator had taught him, and watched the shuttle depart. Peace, he knew, was never a single treaty. It was 100 small moments like this one, repeated until they became habit, instead of miracle. Humanity hadn't won the galaxy's respect through overwhelming strength, it had earned it the way it earned everything. Through patience, sacrifice, and the discipline to wait for the right moment, even when waiting felt like losing. And somewhere in the cold dark of the Kethari Reach, drifting among asteroids that had once nearly ended a civilization, floated the quiet proof of a truth the galaxy was only beginning to learn. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been its fleet. It had always been its will to endure. Years later, historians on both sides of the border would argue over what to call it. The Kethari incident, the silent trap, the battle that wasn't. But the people who had lived through it, on Ashgrove Station, and aboard the Meridian's Oath alike, remembered it simply as the day an empire learned that the smallest fleet in the room could still own the room entirely. Tholrak never forgot it either. He retired from active command within the year, but before he did, he wrote a single line in his final report to the Dominion Senate. One that would be quoted in military academies across Korveth space for a generation to come. "We were not defeated by a stronger enemy. We were defeated by an enemy who understood the battlefield better than we understood ourselves." That, more than any weapon humanity ever built, was the victory Reyes had been fighting for all along.